Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 29th of June of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to continue with the massive missile and drone strike that took place during the previous night. I would like to remind you that the Russians attacked the territory of Ukraine with a significant number of drones and missiles. We have already discussed the situation during the previous video, but now by the end of the 29th of June of 2025, we got additional updates regarding the targets that the Russians chose to attack. You know that when talking about the information that you may find in the open source, you will not be able to get lots of updates of what exactly the Russians were trying to destroy. There are just two objects that were attacked by Russia when talking about the open source data. For example, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians attacked the Nikolaev, the city of Nikolaev, more precisely the industrial zone to the south of this area. And when talking about fire anomalies, we have a map of fire anomalies, and this situation was recorded, and the sources are saying that when talking about the city of Nikolaev, the Russians attacked these industrial facilities, and the Russians, as you can see, destroyed several hangars that most likely the Ukrainians used to repair aircraft of the Kulbakina air base, and most likely the Russians destroyed several barracks that Ukrainians were using to produce drones. So this is not 100% sure information, but most likely due to this picture and due to these planes in this airfield, we believe that this is exactly what the Russians were trying to attack. Another place that was attacked by the Russians, according to this map, this is the city Nikolaev, the previous target. Another target that was attacked by the Russians is the western part of Ukraine. So we have two explosions on the map, and when we go to the western part of Ukraine, we're gonna find another fire anomaly, and this is exactly the area that was bombed by the Russians. So this is the city of Drahobych, and the Russians, as you can see according to this picture and according to the map, destroyed this oil refinery. A very big and very huge oil refinery was destroyed as a result of Russian missile strikes and drone strikes. And we also understand the purpose and the reason why the Russians chose this oil refinery to attack. Currently, the Russians are in offensive, and of course, it is very important for them to destroy as many as possible oil depots, fuel depots of the armed forces of Ukraine, which can lead to complete collapse either both of Ukrainian logistic and of Ukrainian attempts or Ukrainian possibilities and their capabilities to carry out successful defense mission or counterattacks. So this oil refinery was destroyed. The third place that was attacked by the Russians is the Kremenchuk oil refinery. But there is one important thing that I would like to point your attention. When talking about this picture, there is lots of explosions and lots of roads of attacks are going exactly in this point. So this is the Kremenchuk oil refinery, and if we go back to map, this is exactly the area that was attacked by the Russians. And according to information we have, this picture took place today in the area of Kremenchuk. There was very heavy explosion and very huge fire anomaly. So, but there is one important detail that I would like to point your attention. If you go to the NASA satellite pictures of fire anomalies, and this is very strange, you will not be able to find any fire anomaly in the area of the city of Kremenchuk. So either this picture is old or maybe this is a fake. So as for now, I'm not sure, and I can't tell you that the Russians indeed attacked the Kremenchuk oil refinery, or maybe the Russians attacked this oil refinery, but most likely the Russians attacked empty depots or empty balloons or empty facilities without gas, without oil, without fuel, and that is why the Ukrainians were so fast to remove this fire from the area. So that is why the picture of fire anomaly wasn't recorded by the NASA specialized systems. So this is very interesting. But anyway, despite we have discussed at least 3 points: Kremenchuk, we have discussed Drabohich, we have discussed the city of Nikolaev, but according to this map, there were few more places that were attacked by the Russians with drones, with missiles, and with different types of weapon. And telling the truth, I was very surprised when I managed to discover what exactly the Russians attacked during the previous 12 hours. I'm telling you, I was very surprised. So let's discuss. And first, another city that was attacked by the Russians is the city of Dnipro. When talking about this target, telling the truth, nothing special. We're just covering this area because it is also, this area also has some fire anomaly, and I think that it is very important to talk about this situation as well. So as you can see, and as usually during the previous strikes, the Russians attacked this industrial area, very huge industrial zone where the Ukrainians most likely were producing drones. Maybe the Ukrainians were producing or repairing tanks and many other different things that later the Ukrainian military was using. Anyway, this territory was under very heavy fire. So just a regular missile strike and drone strike when talking about this situation. And during the previous 12 hours, I managed to discover 3 more places that were attacked by the Russians, and these 3 more places surprised me most of all. So first, let's talk about the city of Kryvyi Rog, and the fire anomaly was recorded in the southern part. So this is the part of the city of Kryvyi Rog, so very important industrial city of Ukraine, very important city when talking about military facility, military capabilities, and this zone was attacked. And when I tried to analyze what exactly the Russians were trying to attack with missiles, I came to the conclusion that the Russians were trying to destroy this cement plant. So this is a cement plant that produces cement for Ukraine economy, for Ukraine military forces, and the most important, this is a cement plant that Ukrainians use to produce fortifications, and this is very important. So this is the first cement plant that was attacked by the Russians during the previous 24 hours, during the previous night. Let's move further, and this is another fire anomaly, and if we zoom in, we're gonna find also a picture in the NASA special website where we can find this fire anomaly, and if we try to understand what exactly the Russians attacked, we will be able to find another title of this facility, and this is another cement plant. So this is a second cement plant that was destroyed by the Russians during the previous night as a result of massive missile and drone strike, and obviously the situation with Ukrainian fortification can become tense after this attack, obviously. And the third geolocation was discovered to the south of the city of Rovna, another industrial zone, another fire anomaly, huge fire anomaly that is covering the entire area of this facility, and we will try to understand what exactly the Russians destroyed. We will find out that this is a third cement plant that was destroyed by the Russians as a result of massive missile attack. So we are in the summer period of time, the period of time when people are trying to build something, to construct something, houses, probably some constructions, maybe buildings, facilities, different mill factories and so on, not just civilians. And this is the period of time, the best period of time when you can produce as many as possible defensive lines along the entire line of combat contact. Now the Ukrainians need a lot of cement, a lot of production or lots of products of these factories to improve their positions around the city of Sumy. The Russians are about to break through the final defense belt of 2014-2022, and the Ukrainians urgently need to create another defensive line further in the northwestern part of Ukraine, deeper inside of the territory of Ukraine. And the Russians, of course, they understand this. The Russians understand that they need not just to advance, but this is very important for the Russians to move faster than Ukrainians are able to produce defensive lines. And to do this, first of all, the Russians need to destroy the plants and factories that produce cement itself. And the previous night confirmed this, that the Russians are trying to attack not just all over the entire territory of Ukraine. The Russians have certain tasks, and the current task force the Russians to destroy as many as possible facilities, energy facilities, military facilities that are involved in the production of fortifications and trenches along the line of combat contact. And this is very interesting. So we expect that due to these attacks, and obviously these attacks are not going to be the last ones, most likely Ukrainians will start suffer huge problems with the cement productions and the products of these cement factories. So let's discuss the situation along the line of combat contact. During the previous 24 hours, we got lots of very interesting updates. And first, let's talk about the Sumy direction, where the Russians and the Ukrainians continue their counterattacks and attacks. Today we have small adjustments of map in the area onto the south of the settlement of Alexeyevka. In this video, we can see how Russians were bombing and attacking the tree lines in the fortifications of the armed forces of Ukraine to the south of Alexeyevka. And based on this video, we came to conclusion that most likely the Ukrainians managed to restore not just the village of Andreevka, but to restore control over the territory around the village of Malako-Karchakovka. So based on this video that was published by the Russian sources, we have adjusted the map in Ukrainian favor and we have colored this territory under complete Ukraine control. So we see that Ukrainians managed to improve their position significantly as a result of their counteroffensive, but on the other side we see that the Russians still haven't managed to find a key or a solution how to take the settlement of Yunakivka under complete control. There are still very heavy clashes and the Ukrainians show fierce resistance. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area of the city by the name of Vovchansk. As we discussed in the previous videos, the Russians began assault operation on the western part of the city, and currently there are very heavy clashes, very fierce clashes for the territory of the industrial zone in the western part. This is the most important strategical position for both the Russians and the Ukrainians, because who controls these industrial facilities can control the entire city of Vovchansk, because as you can see, this is not just the industrial zone, this is an elevation that the Russians can use to control deep inside of the territory of the Kharkiv region. So that is why the Russians began assault operation after they managed to cross the river of Volcha. And as we discussed during the previous video, according to several pro-Russian resources, as a result of this offensive operation, the Russians managed to establish complete control over these territories, and obviously this is a very huge progress on the ground. And most likely the industrial zone of the city of Vovchansk would be taken by the Russians in the very near future. The Ukrainians at the same time are trying to bring for as many as possible reinforcements and reserves with the purpose to stabilize the situation, but the problem is for the Ukrainians, of course, is that the Russians establish complete FPV drone control over the main supply lines. In this video we can see how another car with reinforcements was heading towards the city of Vovchansk but was destroyed by the Russian drone. In this video, for example, we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the main positions and the main concentration of Ukrainian forces around the city of Vovchansk. The Russians were trying to destroy as many as possible temporary deployment points of reserves that could be used to stabilize the situation. Another important thing that I would like to point your attention is that the Russians are focused not just in the western part of the city of Vovchansk. According to information we noted a huge, let's say, anomaly of Russian activities in the area between the villages of Tikha and Vovchi Hutory. So this concentration of icons, this concentration of updates tell us that most likely the Russians are going to cross the river of Volcha, not just in the western part, but the Russians will try to cross the river also in this area with the purpose to cut this direction in two. And then the Russians will try to take in pincers the southern part of the city of Vovchansk, and the Russians will begin a separate offensive operation along the river of Volcha on the Ukrainian side with the purpose to get the border with the Russian Federation. So we expect the intensification of Russian offensives in this area in coming days. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area of the city of Redkodup in the southern Kupyansk direction. There are very heavy clashes in this area, and during the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the area of the village of Zelonaya Dolina. According to pro-Russian resources and neutral mappers, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to secure up to 50% of the settlement, and the Russians continue their offensive. Most likely due to the situation, the Ukrainians in coming days would be forced to fall back from this area completely, and then the Russians will begin the battles for the settlements of Shandrigolova and the battle for the settlement of Kolodezi. These are two final villages before the beginning of the battle for the Liman agglomeration. Now let's discuss the situation in the area of the city of Siversk. During the previous 24 hours, we got very interesting updates from this area. According to information we have, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to break through Ukrainian defense in this area. The most important that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to force to fall back the Ukrainians from the central part of the city of Serebryanka, and the Russians continue offensive. As for the end of the 29th of June, the Russians established control for over something like this, and the Russians continue offensive. The most important point is that, according to pro-Russian resources, the Russians still face some problems with their offensive because the Ukrainians still are able to counterattack the Russians from the north, from the Serebryanka forest through the river of Siversk, Donetsk, Donbass. So this is the only factor that slows down the Russians in their offensive and in their attempts to secure the village of Serebryanka completely. But due to the fact that the Russians first secured the eastern part and now the Russians, according to several sources, secured the northern part, this is just a matter of several days probably when the Russians will secure the village of Serebryanka completely. And I would like to remind you that several military experts call the village of Serebryanka the gates of the city of Siversk. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense on the way to the city of Siversk itself. Several pro-Russian, very reliable resources reported that the Russians managed to secure these territories as well, and to take under complete control this water reservoir to the west of the village of Verkhnykamenska. Furthermore, according to information we have, and according to the same pro-Russian, very reliable resources, the first sabotage and reconnaissance group currently have possibilities to answer the eastern part of the city of Siversk itself. So, to understand this piece of news, we need to understand that since the beginning of the special military operation, the foot of a Russian soldier of a sabotage and reconnaissance group entered the city of Siversk for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation. We're not talking about regular army, we're just talking about spies, about sabotage and reconnaissance groups, about engineers, I'm talking about these miners, sappers who can sapper the territory. So now the Russians are in the vicinity of the city of Siversk, which means that the battle for this stronghold is going to start probably even in coming days. Now let's discuss the situation for the city of Konstantinovka. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions along the entire line of combat contact, starting from the city of Chasiv Yar and ending with the N32 road. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions along Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. Let's compare the differences between the dates. So this is the situation by the end of the 28th of June, and this is the situation by the end of the 29th of June. The Russians took under control the Russian side of the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, and the Russians secured the Cech number 2 microdistrict. And according to this configuration, we see that Ukrainians control just around from 5 till 10% of the city of Chasiv Yar, and it's also just a matter of several days when the Russians will be able to secure the city of Chasiv Yar completely. Now let's discuss the situation to the south of the Kupyansk pocket. As you can see, we have changes on the ground. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to get a bit closer to the Katerinovka Kupyansk from the north, from the southwest, and the Russians managed to get to Yablunovka also from the southwest. When talking about this update, we have a video that confirms Russian progress on the ground. In this video, we can see how Russians using vehicles were moving through the fields in the direction of the tree lines with the purpose to land infantry. So this episode took place exactly in this area, and the Russian vehicle was moving something like this. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians improved their positions in the direction of 0524 road. So as we can see, the Russians are entering the final phase of the battle for the Kupyansk pocket. They managed to tighten the news around main Ukrainian positions, and the Russians continue offensive. At the same time, as you can see, according to this video, the Russians established complete FPV drone and fire control over the only exit from these pockets between the settlements of Kupyansk and Konstantinovka. The Ukrainians are no longer available to use these roads for evacuation because currently they are under very heavy fire from the Russian artillery and FPV drones. Every single tree line and supply line in this area is under complete Russian fire control. The most important updates are coming from the Pokrovsk agglomeration. Today, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Siversk, stated that the Russians opened a new direction of offensive operation, and this is a Dobropolsky direction. So, by the name of the settlement, by the name of Dobropolye. And as for geolocations and as for different updates that were provided today by different sources, the Russians are trying to advance in the direction of the settlement of Dobropolye from the southeast. And according to information information we have, and the most important, according to several very reliable pro-Russian resources, as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to break through Ukrainian defense and answer the village or the settlement of Novoekonomichne, the settlement of Razine, the settlement of Novotoretskaya. If the Russians are able to continue offensive operation and to dig in deeper on this new line, this is going to be the beginning of a cauldron for the armored forces of Ukraine and their contingent on the territory of the city of Pokrovsk. So as for now, we don't have proofs, we don't have changes from the most reliable resources, but we believe that we are going to get some in the very near future. At the same time, the Russians continue their pressure. The Ukrainians are trying to counterattack by sending more and more vehicles, but everything that enters this field is being destroyed, can be destroyed by the Russians very soon, very fast. Now let's talk about the Dnipropetrovsk direction. We have lots of very interesting updates. First of all, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village of Novoukrainka. We got this information yesterday, and this information yesterday was published by several very reliable pro-Russian resources, but several Russian resources reported that not just the village of Novoukrainka was secured by the Russians, but also the village of Dachne. So these two villages on the Ukrainian side of the river of Volcha were taken by the Russians, according to several sources, by the end of the 28th of June. And today this information was also confirmed by several neutral mappers. And you know that this is a very interesting piece of news, because according to these reports, the Russians secured the village of Dachne. And when talking about this village, this is the first village of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So if this information is correct, then the Russians by the end of the 29th of June of 2025 managed to establish complete control over the first village of the Dnipropetrovsk region, and this is obviously going to be huge media victory and huge media damage to Zelensky and to Siversk himself. At the same time, the Ukrainians are trying to evacuate their soldiers from this pocket under very heavy fire of Russian FPV drones. The Ukrainians have no chances to escape this territory without losses, and the only way they can do this is during the night period of time. But anyway, we see that this pocket has already collapsed, and it's just a matter of several days when we colored this territory under complete Russian control. As for the Zaporozhye direction, the Russians continue their offensive operation in the area of the settlement of Malinovka. This information was confirmed by neutral mappers. The entire southern part of the village was taken by the Russians. And as for the settlement of Orekhov, the Russians improved their positions in the eastern part by taking the eastern part of the settlement under complete control. As for now, there are very heavy clashes for the former prison. The Russians managed to block this prison during the previous days of offensive operation, and now the Russians are trying to establish complete control over this territory. The Ukrainians understand the value of this former prison. If they lose this former prison, then most likely they will be forced to fall back towards the city of Orekhov with the purpose to create a defense and to stabilize the situation around the settlement itself. But something tells me that they will not be able to do this under this Russian pressure. And also it depends on how fast the Russians are able to walk through this former prison. Depends whether the Russians are able to begin clashes for Orekhov during this summer military campaign or during the autumn. And that's it for today. Military of a Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.